Look, I'd just like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on here tonight in Melbourne, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and emerging. And of course, as NAIDOC Week passes us last week, also acknowledge any First Nations nutrition leaders tuning in. And also the fact that as the longest continuous culture in the world, and I believe the original inventors of the concept of planetary health, the deep connection that Australian Aboriginals have, do and always will have to food and of course to food through land. Look, it's a pleasure to join, also to join such an all-star cast. I would just join Boyd, who is an absolute superstar and a hero of mine and colleague, to acknowledge the great work that you guys have done putting together this evening, really bringing these discussions to the fore and hosting important, big, bold conversations about the future of our food systems in a forum with individuals like yourselves who will go on to not only shape the future of health and public health and nutrition, but also many of you probably will go on to shape large parts of the world through governance and your future roles in leadership. And so combining and comparing, focusing and then recommitting is just so important at this time, particularly on the eve, of course, of the UN Food Systems Summit. I think it is important, while we're in this moment of chaos in this highly volatile world, I think it really is important to take a step back and take stock of where we are in 2021. Of course, we're just 9 years from 2030, the moment, by which we have all as a global community committed to achieving sustainable development, leaving no one behind, achieving 17 goals and 169 targets, including ending hunger, which of course is not just hunger or undernutrition, but malnutrition in all its forms. And yet where we stand today, we are further from that goal than we were yesterday, than we were a year ago. 2 billion people today woke up micronutrient deficient, 2.1 billion overweight or obese, 830 odd million people continue to go hungry, as a previous speaker said, on a planet that's never been richer and that produces more food than we would need to feed everyone. And sadly, hunger is actually on the rise after decades of declines. It is now once again on the rise, sharp rise due to conflict and climate change. Climate change, in fact, also presenting through conflict, and of course, exacerbated by COVID, which has doubled the number of people being served by the World Food Programme. Increased by 150 million, the number of people being served by the World Food Programme. At the same time, we know that about a third of food is lost or wasted across the planet. Whilst about 50 million children are overweight or obese, 1 in 5 children across our planet today, 1 in 5, an incredible and shameful indictment on the global community, are hungry or undernourished for such a significant part of the first years of their life, including the time that they're in their mother's womb, that they in fact will never reach full economic, social, cultural, physical or physiological potential. Of course, we know that as stunting. And COVID's come along over the last 20 or so months. And whilst in the early days of the global pandemic, it was, some were calling it the great leveler, that it would somehow help to close many of these long-standing and exacerbating gaps of inequity. It's done pretty much the opposite, that while it may have been deemed or hoped as a great leveler, actually, I would probably frame it more as the great accelerator, that many of the troubling trajectories that our planet, our human health, and of course malnutrition, with regards to malnutrition that we're on worldwide and within countries, that all of those have largely accelerated, and so too have the processes that are driving them. We've seen, even here in Australia, a doubling of food insecurity. We've seen increased consumption of sugary drinks among young people. And very concerningly, we've seen families as budgets tighten, turning to lower cost foods to make ends meet. But at the same time, I think it is also important to acknowledge in 2021 that COVID presents some really significant opportunities for us as we continue the fight to achieve a fair, sustainable and healthy food system. First of all, the social determinants in 2021 for many countries around the world, for conservative governments or liberal progressive governments, the social determinants of health that we are also passionate about have truly gone from being politically unpalatable to being politically unavoidable. We have seen that if you leave populations vulnerable, if they cannot get access to secure work or paid sick leave, if their housing is of the poorest quality, or indeed if there are people struggling to make ends meet, all of these fuel not only the virus, but also insecurity and uncertainty that in turn fuels viral transmission. Health is front and center in our minds as populations and for politicians. And of course, the importance of public health has never been so clear to communities and to countries across the planet. And I think a good example of this in our space of food policy is, of course, what's happened in the UK. The risks of COVID significant increase in death associated with overweight and obesity has compelled conservative governments in the UK to push forward with important protections around with regards to food and policy actions. So what do we need at this point of time? Well, it's clear the Lancet Commission, which I led the launch and rollout as CEO, along with Gunhild and others all around the world. The clear message is that we need a global food system transformation. This, of course, is built across a number of pillars, primarily being a rapid and significant transformation in diets, realizing that one size fits all might be the destination in terms of the planetary health diet, but that for probably 1 billion or more people across the planet, it actually involves having access to and eating more animal source proteins, whilst for the majority, and particularly I would say most of us on this call tonight, it will see us eat significantly less. It sees us reduce the amount of food that we lose before markets or waste after markets in places like our homes and restaurants and across industry. And of course, technology, investing in continuing to invest in technology, not only to close yield gaps, to find more sustainable ways of producing food, transporting food, supply chains, and of course then even technologies that allow us to consume and transition to healthier diets. Here in Australia, closer to home, well, as with the wider syndemic of chronic that Boyd talked about, or the slow motion pandemic of chronic disease that Margaret Chan talked to, this is an issue born and solved in policy. This is not a challenge of collective failure on the parts of individuals. This is a challenge of collective failure on the parts of politicians. The good news, though, is that proven solutions exist. You talked about whether it's guidelines and clear dietary guidelines and recommendations that are leap years ahead of ours from Brazil or Canada, or whether it's fiscal policies in 50 jurisdictions around the world that use dollars as a powerful incentive to guide purchasing behaviours, or even reducing as a starting point subsidies that incentivize the wrong things being produced and things being artificially cheap to get to market. Or whether it's, of course, increasing and strengthening our food labelling policies to ensure that, families and individuals, when they're tired and hungry after a long day, and not having to have a PhD to understand the long, convoluted and increasingly difficult nutrition labels that we find on the back of, the tiny packaging, while the front of packaging is dominated by cartoons that speak directly to our children and are placed in supermarkets at the height where our children are passing by. We need to realise that also, though, that many significant opportunities come with this transition for countries like Australia. It's not just about eating less of the things we love. It's actually also about eating a lot more of many of the things that we love. And I think more of the conversation needs to be about the things we get to eat more of: whole grains, nuts, seeds, fresh fruits and vegetables, many of which we produce right here in Australia as a major food producer. It's about understanding that we have a global responsibility. We live on one planet, and we can't ignore that while we continue to overconsume and consume in an irresponsible way, we continue to lock out 850 million people from the global food system, because we only have one planet, one set of planetary boundaries. And if we continue to take more than our fair share, we by definition will lock others out, either in this generation or in future generations. And we also need to acknowledge that while food is the language and the passion with which we all probably revolve most of our lives, professional and personal, around, it's also the canary in the mine for much deeper inequities that exist and have been, again, exposed by the COVID pandemic. So what do these local shifts look like? Well, for the consumer in Australia, it is about moving towards a more plant-forward diet. It's about addressing our overconsumption of red meat and our over-reliance. It's about closing or significantly reducing the amount of food that we waste. And of course, it's about where we can and where we have the power and the economic power as individuals to use our fork, our note, and even our vote itself to vote for a better future and a better food system. As producers, it's about, it's actually largely a good story for Australian producers. We are very efficient at growing food here in Australia, and we're going to need to have a more globalized food system going into the future. We will need to grow food where it can be grown most efficiently, but, and this is the big caveat, we are going to then need to pay for ecosystem services and the rainforests and the oceans around the world that are servicing our ability to grow food for other parts of the world. We will need to bring those into our global economy and reflect those in the way that we produce food, and properly offset those services that other countries and nearby neighbours in our region, keeping those services, those ecosystem services alive and well, are in our best interests and will allow us to continue then to produce food efficiently and continue to be a net exporter. It's about working across sectors and unlocking those co-benefits. I don't believe that the current voices of parliament that claim to represent farmers really do represent many of the farmers I get to meet across Victoria. They are worried about climate change. They want to be growing food that is going to make Australians healthier. They want to be part of the future and part of the solution. And so unlocking those co-benefits of organisations like this tonight, working more closely with farmers, hand in hand, producers, to help them to make that transition. And finally, for governments, we need a national food strategy. We need a national food strategy that is free of influence from harmful industries. We need stronger, more robust and better evolved dietary guidelines. But people like Rosemary Stanton, who's on tonight, is a guru. I'm not going to pretend that I know half as much as she does, but I think, we have such a wealth of experience and insight in this country. We can do much better when it comes to the way that we think about food, the way that we plan for future through food. And we need to make sure that those tools and guidelines integrate climate, integrate culture, and are free from conflicts of interest. We need to continue to invest in technology, make sure that our organisations like CSIRO and others are free to actually do important, bold, ambitious and independent work that's in the best interests of our country and the future of our country and future generations. And finally, we need to actually implement the policy levers that are going to support the diet transitions that we need Australians to make. And again, so many other countries around the world have done it. We continue to pretend that somehow they're different or that sometimes they don't even exist. Well, they do. Other countries are light years ahead of us. And so it's time for us to step up and step to the plate and really do what we need to do to support, through policy, individuals and families across Australia to make an affordable transition to healthy and sustainable diets. Finally, I just say COVID is a huge opportunity, I think, for all of us. As I said earlier, the social determinants being front and centre, health being on people's mind, the direct links between obesity, chronic disease, and COVID, and the hugely volatile reform environment around us, now is, I think, the time to ensure that we don't just go back to a business as usual when it comes to our food systems going beyond this current pandemic, but that we truly do build back fairer, healthier, and more sustainably, and grasp this opportunity with both hands to drive that food system transformation. For us here in Victoria, I think a key way of doing that, and I'm a strong believer of empowering young people. And I say that as, you know, I'm not that old myself, but I don't regard myself as a young person. I think, you know, when the State of the World's Children's Report, UNICEF's report in 2019 came out that put young people at the centre of our food systems and said, what does a food system look like that works for young people, that is going to work for young people who will be leaders and living on a planet well beyond the time that we are. So thinking about the intergenerational nature and equity, but thinking about young people, thinking about what they need, and thinking about young people across the planet. I think if we can try and build back better post-COVID with young people at the centre, as we reimagine our food systems, I think it's a profound opportunity to drive that transformation that we're all so passionate about. So thank you very much again for having me, and again, keep on fighting, and well done for such a great forum tonight.
And thank you so much, Sandro. I mean, I think it was a really motivating talk, and I think it was just great